Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Study Chronicles. Today, we're going to go over a new scenario. Last time on the Study Chronicles, we went over the cutoff versus the big blind from the big blind's perspective. And so this time, we're going to go over the earliest of positions under the gun. This is going to wrap up our single raised pots. So I hope that the single raised pot study sessions have helped you guys. There's a lot of crossover, of course, between under the gun and hijack and cutoff and button, but I think it's really important just to have a full range of all of the, pun intended, full range of all of the different scenarios so that you can understand the differences between when a range starts tightening up and where the thresholds are for having some wider ranges, having some tighter ranges, and still learning how to defend the big blind from everything. Playing out of the big blind is one of the most important scenarios to master. It's very difficult sometimes because there's a lot of different combos and it changes differently between all of the different positions. So learning how to play the big blind, I would say, is one of the most important things to do in 6max. So this will hopefully give you guys a good framework for that. All right, let's get into the ranges for under the gun, and then we're going to start jumping into some drills, shall we? So let me hit my, there we go. GTO wizard. Okay. So as always, we're using our general NL500 GTO ranges, and we're going to have the under the gun position open. So 17.6% raising. We use a small min raise here, and in theory, that is because there is a higher frequency of someone 3-betting behind, so we're risking less when we do face a 3-bets. Out of position is tough to sometimes play, so not committing to inflating the pot, battling against players in position, kind of makes sense to have this small sizing. So we're going to use the small sizing. Some players use a 2.5x, and if you do, that'll change your range a bit, but it's not going to make things vastly different for our strategy. So we're gonna look at the min raise. What hands are we min raising? It looks like the offsuit broadways are going to be our threshold. And then the suited king 5 at a small frequency, as well as a little bit of queen 8 suited is in there. 10-8 suited, 9-7 is marked, but I don't think it's gonna be part of my strategy. I don't typically raise 9-7 suited under the gun because it's only a 1% raise if it is, according to this solution, which would be a pain in the butt to always hit RNG and never see the one. It's just not worth putting into my range. So I don't raise this one under the gun, but I do raise 8-7 suited, 9-8 suited, 10-9 suited, all of the 9x suiteds at pure frequency. Those are the important combos at the threshold. 10-8 suited, yeah, you can definitely put that into your range. I probably haven't been opening it enough, but I should be opening it more. 6-5 suited, 5-4 suited at a mix, along with the other suited combos. Pocket 2s are going to be a mix all the way up to about 5s. You can see that 5s are in fact folding under the gun at a frequency. 4s and 3s and 2s are all very similar frequencies, around 35%. So if you can remember about a third of the time the smaller pair is open, that'll be a nice heuristic for you because that's pretty much the exact frequency for this solution. And that's about it. Everything else is kind of obvious, all the strong hands. We are folding ace-2 suited. This might be surprising to some players. I think some players might just have a habit of opening every single suited ace, but ace-2 suited is a fold under the gun in this solution. And something to note, if you do use the 2.5x, that is going to change the sizing of your open, which means it's going to be a tighter range. So some of those threshold hands are maybe going to stop raising. So you see hands like 10-8 suited all of a sudden are now gone, and it reshapes the range that we're using. So you actually see ace-2 suited starts to raise and you start seeing some other different combos at play here. So some of the offsuit broadways might be folding more, might be folding less. It's just something to go through. You can see sixes is now actually folding at a high frequency. So it's kind of reshaping these lower pairs and then starting to use some more of the ace two suited, maybe some more of the ace 10 offsuit instead. So using hands with blockers over, you know, the playability and implied equity hands like low pairs. So yeah, just something to note there. The more you look at these kind of changes, you can also look at the 3x real quick if you wanted. So you can do the 3x opening size at NL 500, and then you'll see how much that changes things from under the gun versus big blind. This is something it's important to know because you're going to see a lot of different strategies at 6 max. And then the 3x, you start seeing twos and threes aren't even playing. We're actually folding some pairs for the 3x. So if someone's opening 3x, you can discount some of these weaker combos. Jack 9 suited is actually pure folding. So it's a significant difference if you're min raising or you're 3xing. But for today's drills, we are going to use the NL 500 GTO. Okay. So what is the big blind going to defend? Again, that does defend differently against all of the different opening sizes, but against the min raise, you'll see that we're defending the offsuit connectors. So something like 5-4 offsuit is going to be a threshold hand versus under the gun, heads up. Some of the suited combos are going to mix at the bottom. So 10-4, 10-3, 9-3 and 9-2 surprisingly are in there. It must have something to do with just, I don't know, having a suited 3 or having a suited 2 at some frequency. And these are the better ones for some reason. I'm not sure. But there is a mix of those weaker hands there. And then the offsuit combos are going to be scarce. They have the offsuit broadways, but the offsuit aces are folding at a mix: ace 4, ace 3, ace 2, ace 7, ace 6. And then none of these weak king high, queen high, jack high, 10 highs are going to be in there. So folding frequently when you have an offsuit combo versus under the gun, typically a good heuristic, unless you have something like a Broadway combo or a strong ace. The 3-bet range is going to be different than all of the other ranges we've looked at. It's going to be tighter. We are going to call more often with hands like queens and jacks, which is a change of pace. I think versus the hijack, you'll see queens has a fairly high frequency 3-bet out of the big blind. Yeah, pure frequency 3-bet there. So this is the position in which we can start flatting queens, which maybe some of you guys aren't even doing, but it is a thing in the solution that we should be flatting very strong hands like ace king offsuit, like queens, so that we can play post flop with some of the stronger combos against a very tight range. So keeping that in mind, the only hands we're ever pure 3-betting out of the big blind versus under the gun is aces, kings, and ace king suited. So if you ever want to think about flatting, you can flat everything except for these 3 combos. All right, let's jump into the trainer, shall we? I guess we could also take a quick look at how the ranges change based on the 3x. Let's just do that real quick, and then we'll jump into the drills, because I've noticed a use of 3x come to light lately. I don't know if it's because when GTO Wizard released their 3x open range, maybe some players switched because they thought it was an easier to implement strategy, or that people would play against it incorrectly. But let's just take a quick look at how different of a range we have to defend versus 3x then versus the min raise. So if we open 3x under the gun, we'll see from the big blind we're defending, or sorry, it's easier to just look at the fold frequency because that's one stat to compare to the other. So there's an 82% fold frequency versus a 60% fold frequency. So we are playing 22% more hands versus a min raise than versus the 3x. Very big difference here. And you can see we're even folding some like 9-7 suited, 8-6 suited, 7-5 suited versus this 3x. So we have to play a very tight range. All of the offsuit combos as well. It's going to be a big difference, right? So you even see some king jack, queen jack, ace 10. Strong hands are folding here against the 3x. So this is maybe a range you might be more accustomed to for live poker. I think too many players are defending light out of the big blind in live poker because they think to themselves, oh, I'm getting a good price. This player sucks. I'm going to gain an edge post flop. But look at all of these folds from these offsuit combos. And this rake relatively is a lot lower than a live game. So if you are a live player, just keep that in mind versus large raises from under the gun. You really have to tighten up a lot of your range. Okay, let's look at the drills now, shall we? We'll reset this. So I created a drill for under the gun versus big blind. Let's dive in. Just like all of the other episodes where we go through some drills, we find some important spots, and then we start looking through the aggregated reports to understand more about our strategy. So right away, we know from prior episodes of the Study Chronicles that the big blind is going to lead the least frequent against under the gun and the most frequent against the button. So keeping that in mind, we're going to see a lot of checks. And what is our strategy when villain checks? Well, let's open up the aggregated reports and take a look. So when big blind checks, we have the option for all four sizings. We have 124, 76, 50, and 33. So everything is being used. And the most frequent is going to be 33 or 50. There's a lot of board textures that are going to favor under the gun because of how tight of a range is. Whenever you have a very tight range, most boards are going to favor you. So you're going to see a lot of the 33 sizings. Compared to something like the button, how does that differ is a question I have. So let's say, so 32 and 18. So let's say the button opens, big blind defends. You can see that the sizings and the frequencies are a bit different. So you see more of a check from a wider range, but the ratios are similar. You mostly have the 33 or 50, but it is spread a little bit more evenly from the medium to the large and overbet sizings. But the important thing is that we are c-betting at a higher frequency. We're using a smaller sizing when we're playing from under the gun. And that's going to be the most common strategy. So you can see again, 75%. Less overbetting than late position 2. I think that's because when we have a tighter range, big blind has to defend stronger, which means we're less incentivized to overbet on certain textures because big blind is going to have more strong hands. So because big blind is going to have queens, jacks, tens, ace, king offsuit, there aren't as many textures where we're excited about overbetting. Like a texture like queen 10 4 might be a lot better of an overbet from the big blind than it is from under the gun. Even the 10 high boards are less good to overbet from under the gun, I think. So we'll take a look at that as we go through some hands. All right. Ace jack, queen 8-6, so checks to us. This is one of the few offsuit combos we're going to have. Having an ace of spades is really good. We want to c-bet this at a high frequency, I think. We rolled an 87, so if we ever check back 13% of the time, then we should. As we saw, the global check frequency was something like 30. This is a texture in which I think this is a fine flop to check back. I'm torn between having an ace of spades and betting at a high frequency and going with the global check. So I think the safe option is bet 33. That's what I'm going to do here, although I wouldn't be surprised if this was a check. Yeah, so this is a check. And we do have actually all four sizings here with the ace jack. Something I'm probably not doing enough of is betting large with the ace of spades blocker, but that makes a lot of sense. We're blocking ace queen, we're blocking jack queen, we're blocking all of the suited aces that are going to check raise. So it makes sense to play this aggressively. I need to incorporate more larger sizings here, perhaps less of this third sizing. Maybe on this board texture, we do play less of a small bet than I had anticipated. Let's take a look. So versus a check, we do in fact not use a lot of small bets. Okay, so queen high board, we're going to be betting large or checking as our strategy for the most part here, which is slightly surprising, but it makes sense. There's a lot of straight draws. There's a lot of hands with equity we have from under the gun on a texture like this. A lot of our range is going to smash this queen high kind of board. So betting large makes a lot of sense. Having an overbet makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to keep that in mind. Next hand, 10-5-2. So this is exactly the texture I was talking about, where I think we might have less overbets versus being in the button versus the big blind. So in this scenario, we rolled low. We rolled a 36. Sorry, I missed the RNG there. We rolled a 36. I think this is going to be a smaller medium bet. So going back to why I think we have less overbets is because big blind is going to have all of their pocket 10s, pocket 5s, pocket 2s. They're going to have jacks. They're going to have queens. They're going to have a lot of strong hands here. They're even going to have 5-2 suited, which we don't. And 10-5 suited, as we saw in the Sims earlier. So I think this is going to be a small bet check for the most part, but maybe mix in some half pot as well. So I'm going to go small bet this time. And in fact, that is going to be the majority of the strategy here. We do see a low check frequency. And this is because I think king 6 might be one of the worst hands we can have in this position. And also having a 6 is relevant for this texture. Having blockers to 6-4, 6-3 is important. Having clubs is good as a blocker hand. So we're blocking king 10, 10-6 suited, 6-5 suited, all of those combos that are going to continue. So if we had something like, I don't know, for example, if we had a 9 here, maybe we wouldn't block 9-5 suited because big blind folds it. So it all really matters on both of the cards that are in our hand. Let's see if our hypothesis of having less overbets is true from under the gun. So we can see here that the overbet is 1.8%, which is a low percentage. And if we compare that to, let's have the button raise, big blind call, and the flop is 10-5-2, spade, heart, diamond, spade, heart, diamond. Now let's look at the overbet frequency here, and you can see there is a significant difference. And again, that's because of the overpairs and best hands advantage is lower from the under the gun position. All right, so 6-5-5, this is a texture in which I think the big blind is going to connect very well. In fact, I think the big blind can lead this flop, which means we have to be careful when c-betting. We can't just c-bet all of our range here on the texture like this. That being said, I rolled low, and I think a c-bet is going to benefit a hand like jack high, so we're going to go for the small bet. 9-7-2, very similar to the 10 high board. We're going to have, I think, a small bet and a half pot bet or a check. We rolled a 10, so we're going to play this aggressively. Having a club isn't as good as having a backdoor spade, right? Like an ace of spades blocks the continuing range of villain with ace of spade combos that are going to check raise or continue with a call. So like ace jack of spades, ace 10 of spades, ace 8 of spades, right? So having an ace of spades is better than an ace of clubs in terms of c-betting here. That being said, we did roll 10%, so a very aggressive number. Going to go half pot or 33. Let's try half pot this time. There we go. All right, next texture, king 6-5. This one I think is going to favor us. but the 6-5 is very good for the big blind. And like we saw, big blind still has ace king. So they still have some strong hands on this texture. They have king 6 suited, king 5 suited, as do we, at a low frequency. So I'm going to go for the small bet again. Maybe we start using some larger sizings on this texture, but for the most part, I typically go 33-50 as my strategy. And yeah, so we are including some larger sizings here, which makes sense because we can have a lot of strong hands. I don't think we're going to see too much overbets. King high starts to get into that territory of, okay, well, there aren't too many hands that we have a huge advantage on with, right? We have like aces and ace king and kings, and that's really it. So, and villain has ace king. So it's not like we have a really big advantage on this texture, but we do have that aces advantage. So we see a little bit of overbet, and you can see the most common size, the most common combo for overbetting is going to be aces and sixes and fives. So really polarized there if we are going to use an overbet. That being said, it's not a common overbet spot like you would see on something like ace king 5, where now all of a sudden we have aces, we have kings, we have ace king, we have all of the ace queen suited combos as well. So it gets a little different on 2 Broadway cards versus 1 Broadway card. Okay. 9-8-7, and we face our first lead. So how do we play against a lead? I think this is a question that I see come up, and we'll take a look. So versus a lead, our global strategy is going to look like this. We're going to have mostly call, very low frequency fold versus a lead, especially from under the gun. I think we might have more folds from the button, but when we have a tight range, again, it's hard for us to miss flops. So we're going to be calling or raising 50% most of the time. A very low frequency of raise 100%, but on board textures, if villain for some reason leads ace king 6, I guess we will have a large raise. Although I don't think that's going to be a thing. I think that might be like big blind maybe leads 0.001% of the time or something, and then GTO Wizard is picking that up as a strategy, right? So like you see, even if there's a 0.1% chance of a lead, it'll pick up that strategy and give a response to it, right? So you're not really going to see any of those in practice, but just understanding that there is in fact that lead. Most of the textures are going to be as we've studied for leading, right? 7 high, 8 high, ace wheel wheel, some monotone boards with ace high. These are most of the textures that you're going to find leads on. So I wouldn't worry too much about the ace high boards or using 100% raise sizing, because those are the textures that we would want to use the larger sizing on. Instead, we're using mostly 50% versus a bet. So we'll see that our strategy is going to have a lot of raises, and the ones that we're going to raise the most on, again, are boards that hit us really well. The boards we're going to raise the least on are going to be those lockdown boards, like monotone boards with an ace high. That's going to be the ones that, the big blind is going to have the advantage. And then some paired boards in which the big blind also has the advantage. So 5-5-2, 5-5-4, ace 3-2, those ace wheel cards. So those are the textures in which we're going to be not having a raise. So just keeping that in mind. Sometimes it's easier to study the times we don't play aggressively, because other textures you can just assume that we're going to have some kind of aggressive raise frequency. So 9-8-7 versus a lead. I think this is going to be a fold. We don't see very much folding, 17% to be exact in our global strategy, but I think this might be one of those spots to fold without a spade. We rolled high. I'm going to try and fold here. Yeah. All right. Ace queen 10-10-3 versus a check. This is going to be a texture I think we're going to have a slight advantage on, but not much. Villain's going to have some offsuit 10s here, like Jack 10, which we won't have as often, if ever. I rolled really high. I don't think this is a pure c-bet, so I'm going to check. On turn, check. Now, I think I can bet small for value here. However, big blind still does have ace king in their range. So it's less good to value bet with ace queen. I'm going to go ahead and check again, but we do see a little bit of the small bet being used. And now we face a 150 over bet. So pretty tough spot because against this sizing, villain should be repping a 10 or a 5, mostly a 10, I believe. So we want to be blocking the 10 combos in their range. And to best do that, we want to have something like clubs or spades. So having a heart in our hand is not good. We do block queens, which as we know is relevant to big blind's value range. And ace is not really that good unless we had the ace of clubs or ace of spades for blocking the ace 10 suited combos. I have a feeling we're going to have to mix call with ace high here though, because we're not getting to the river with too many better hands that we're excited to call with. And if I had to pick and choose the ace high combos, like I said, it would be the ace of clubs or the ace of spades. So I think I'm going to fold this one and call the others I just mentioned. Yeah, there is a frequency of call here, but it is not too high. And I think if we took a look at the solution, if we looked at, sometimes it's easier to look at the suited combos. So if we look at ace queen suited, my hypothesis here is that ace queen of hearts is going to be a lot worse than ace queen of spades or clubs to defend this overbet with. So if we look at our range by the river, we'll see that the highest frequency fold is, it's in fact opposite of what I said. I wonder why that is. Maybe because their bluffs are going to be the ones that actually block my calling range, which are, okay, so this is usually why you see this when it's the opposite of what I was thinking, is because the best bluffs are going to be the ace queen of clubs from villain, right? And so you don't want to be, or not the actual hand ace queen of clubs, but the ones that are blocking those hands for calling. So their bluffs are going to be clubs, clubs or spades, right? So we don't want to be blocking the clubs or spades in our range. So if you look at their weak hands and their trash hands, I think you'll see that the spades combos are going to be maybe a slight higher frequency here for bluffing. So like something, for example, like queen 6 suited, you see a little bit of a higher bluff frequency than queen 6 of hearts or diamonds, right? It all really depends on the kickers, but yeah, so I think maybe intuitively I had it backwards. Maybe I want to be bluff catching the times where we're blocking the best hands while unblocking the bluffs as well. Not blocking the bluffs is important here. Yeah, you can go into depth. The point is, that's how you're going to figure it out. You look at what their bluffing range is, you look at what their value range is, you try and block the most value while unblocking the most bluffs, and those are going to be the hands that primarily you are going to bluff catch with. So in this scenario, we are going to see a lot of calling with, if we look at the weak hands, the best weak hands here that are ace high, are going to come from ace king, and then next we're going to see ace queen. So it's somewhat linear in bluff catching. You want to use the king x and the queen x before you use something like ace 9. Hey, Gorab coming with a sub for 3 months. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Awesome. Really appreciate that. All right. So yeah, we'll see that as a frequent, trend. And then you actually see some of the bluffs are coming from that ace king of clubs. So again, having clubs is more relevant to blocking strong hands. So it makes sense that if we are going to select some bluffs from our weak hands, that we are blocking ace 10 and king 10 suited that are going to value there. So interesting spot there. Yeah. I think most of our bluffs are going to come from king high, and you can see king queen of spades being one of the more common combos to bluff, which makes a lot of sense because the value portion of the value of the big blind, if we look at the best hands, a lot of those combos are going to come from queens. Queen 10, Queen 10, King 10, King 10. So blocking all of these combos with King Queen of spades makes sense. Yeah. And then if we see, if we do bluff from under the gun, we can see more clearly that their continuing range is even a bigger frequency of these King 10 and Queen 10 kind of combos here. And shows up with 5-4 this time. Okay, ace 8-3 next hand. Small bet check, maybe some half pot, but mostly gonna small bet here. And we do see a little bit of overbets. I don't typically use overbet on ace 8-3, but I guess if we were going to overbet, pocket eights would be the hand, right? Let's take a look at the strategy. So there is a 124%. We are overbetting at a small frequency. And we are going to use ace king and eights and ace 3 and ace 8 and threes. So something that you would expect. What would the trash hands be here? Something like 6-5 of hearts, something like maybe spades, right? Something blocking king X, which is relevant because big blind is going to mostly have to call ace king by the river. So turning a king into a bluff here for an overbet is very interesting. Something like fours with a spade, deuces with a spade. Okay. So typically when you start overbetting, you want to have some removal effects of the cards that villain is going to be able to call by the river, or you want to have something that has just a little bit of equity that also blocks some strong hands as well. Something like pocket fours and fives is something that, blocks 5-4 suited, and also when called can still spike a 4 or a backdoor straight. So having some of those higher equity hands that aren't quite the better good hands, I guess you could say, like spade draws and stuff, that's going to be very relevant here in the overbet frequency. Otherwise, most spade draws, I think, want to bet small. Let's take a look at flush draws. Most of the flush draws want to, bet small, but they do also mix in some of that overbet as well. There we go. Don't have too many flush draws, surprisingly. Not too many suited combos on an ace high board. You see, actually, this is interesting to look at it like this. Huh. Okay. So small bet. Maybe that's why we see a lot of leads from villain when a spade comes in, because we don't have too many flushes. Ace king queen, this is going to be a range bet. This is the first range bet I think we've come across. Small bet or half pot are both good. And that's just because this board texture just absolutely smashes our range. It just connects with a lot of our combos. So it makes sense that we have a range bet. Versus a check raise, we do have a jack, which is relevant here. We're going to continue blocking jack 10. Which is a big part of big blind's value range. Once they check turn, I think we can either have a small bet or check. Now, if they do have spades, they're going to still check this board, this turn at a high frequency, because this particular turn is going to be, I think, better for us. after we call. So after we continue, the board is going to improve for us because we're continuing with mostly strong hands. We're going to be folding all of our junk. Whereas big blind still has a lot of weaker spade draws in their range. We don't have too many weak spade draws as we saw earlier. So I think small bet or check are both good. Intuitively, I think check is better. I was wrong. We want a small bet here, maybe protect against spade draws. So yeah, we have to be more aggressive. Once it goes check, check, then I guess the 60% pot bet makes sense. Looks like the solver wants to overbet. Interesting. Yeah, makes sense. We block full houses with our ace, and then we have the straight with the jack. So I guess we have more value than I thought. Okay. And villain folds the missed spades. Okay, let's go over one more, and then we'll wrap up this session of under the gun versus big blind. So queen jack 8. This is one of those textures I think we can have all the sizings on. However, villain is going to have 10-9 at a higher frequency than us if you think about the offsuit combos. Also, they have pocket queens, they have pocket jacks, they have pocket eights. So it's not a texture that we typically have a big advantage on. So it doesn't make too much sense to have a lot of overbetting or large betting here. I think I'm going to go with mostly a half pot or large, and even some check. I think check is good as well. Let's go with a check this time. I rolled a 72, so if we ever check 30% of the time, I'm going to go ahead and check this board. Looks like we do have a check. It's 22% of the time, so pretty close, but we do have a small, medium, and slightly large sizing. On turn, I think we can start betting. We have a lot of equity, so I'm going to go for the large sizing. We could also still check or mix up our sizing. And then on the river, it's getting really thin to what we can get paid by, but I think we can still get paid by a queen. I think we can get paid by some pairs with a spade, so like pocket tens, maybe some 8x. This is a thin value bet, though. I wouldn't be surprised if I'm supposed to just pure check now. Let's go with a 62% sizing. If I do bet, I want to go 62. But yeah, this is a pure check. Effectively, there is a small frequency of bet 62. But yeah, this hand all of a sudden just got a lot worse once the jack pairs, because villain, of course, improves to jack X at a frequency. They're not going to call all of their weak queen X. They're not going to call their 8X. Maybe they're going to turn their 10s into a bluff. So yeah, not a good spot to go for thin value. And we get called, luckily this time by 8-7 offsuit. All right, that's going to wrap up today's study chronicle. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do like and have been following, please like and subscribe. It helps support the channel, or even just comment in the comment section of what you would like to see in the future for different scenarios, or what scenarios give you the most trouble, so that I can address those in another video. All right, guys, really appreciate all the love and support, and I will see you on the next one.